Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Madhuram Dekar. I am a Community Engagement Manager at Crossref. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this second webinar of the Crossref Learning Series, Building Trust Through Metadata. This series was kicked off in November 2025, and it is focused on supporting the publishing community in India and beyond. The sessions in this series explore how richer metadata and Crossref's infrastructure can strengthen publishing practices, improve research visibility, and preserve the integrity of the scholarly record. Today's webinar, which is titled Upholding Integrity, Crossref Member Obligations, and COPE Guidance, is the second webinar in this series. Today, it brings together experts from Crossref and the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, to explore how metadata, Crossref members' obligations, and publication ethics work together to safeguard the integrity of the scholarly record. So welcome to all of you who are joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Thanks, Amanda. Our first speaker is Amanda Bartel, who is the Director of Membership at Crossref. Amanda joined Crossref in late 2017 to help make our member and user experience as smooth as possible, and her team provides support to Crossref's 23.5 thousand members in 164 countries. She previously worked in educational publishing for over 18 years at the intersection between digital marketing and digital product support. Outside of work, she volunteers as a sighted guide for the visually impaired and generally tries to get outside as much as possible. Today, she is going to talk to us about how the scholarly community can use Crossref metadata to preserve the integrity of the scholarly record, how Crossref member obligations help members demonstrate their support of the integrity of the scholarly record using specific examples, and how contributing to the Research Nexus protects the integrity of the scholarly record. Our second speaker today is Marie Soulier. Dr. Marie F. Soulier is the Head of Editorial Ethics and Quality Assurance with the open access publisher Frontiers, based in Switzerland. She studied pharmacology and biochemistry at the University of Sherbrooke in Canada, and then moved to Austria to conduct postdoctoral research in chemical and computational biology at the University of Innsbruck. She then started her career in open access publishing and has since worked to improve dissemination, access to, and quality of research and published article, with a specific focus on research integrity, quality peer review, and in maintaining ethical standards. From her role as a journal manager of a portfolio of biomedical journals, she became program manager for the physical sciences and engineering and the humanities and social science programs of journals. Between 2016 and 2020, she led teams handling all aspects of the Frontiers collaborative peer review process, and she now leads strategic publishing projects across departments and product platforms. She was heavily involved in developing Frontiers Artificial Intelligence Review Assistant, or IRA. She's an elected COPE Council member since 2020, and she's also a member of Crossref's Membership and Fees Committee. Today, Marie is going to talk to us about the core publication ethics principles promoted by COPE, practical advice from COPE on how journals can uphold ethical standards in publishing, and COPE's latest guidance on retractions and expressions of concern. Welcome, Amanda and Marie, and thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks, Madhura.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Before I hand over to our first speaker, I just wanted to share a quick note about using Zoom. So as you can see, we'll not be able to enable cameras for all of you, but you can still react with different emojis using the react button at the bottom of your screen. There is also a Q&A box where you can enter your questions. So the format of today's webinar will be that there will be two presentations and there will be time for Q&A at the end, but you can keep adding your questions to the Q&A box so that the speakers can take them up at the end of their presentation. You can also enable captions in the meeting if you find that useful. So you'll be able to see the show captions button at the bottom of your screen, and you can use that. This session is being recorded, and we hope that this will be an enjoyable and productive meeting for all of us. And we expect everyone to hold to the Crossref Code of Conduct. With this, I would like to invite our first speaker, Amanda, and over to you, Amanda.
That's great. Thanks, Madhura. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak about Crossref and our members' role in preserving the integrity of the scholarly record. Those of you who are Crossref members, or those of you who attended the first webinar, will be aware that Crossref is a not-for-profit member organisation, and we exist to make scholarly communications better. We try to make research objects easy to find, cite, link, assess, and reuse. And how do we do this? Well, it's a combined effort between Crossref's own infrastructure and the efforts of all of our members. So organisations join Crossref and commit to our membership terms. We provide them with a DOI prefix, and they use this to create a unique digital object identifier, or DOI, for each item that they publish. Each DOI works both as a locator for that item and as a container for a record of metadata. So when I say locator, what I mean there is if you take a DOI string, paste it into a browser, you'll be able to resolve to the current location of that piece of work. But that's just the start of the story. Almost more importantly, you'll also register with us a record of metadata about that published item. So information about that item. So if it's a journal article, what's the article title, who wrote it, where are they affiliated, who funded it, and so on. The metadata we collect is collected in a consistent, machine-readable way, and then it's shared globally and openly through our free APIs. And it's used by thousands of systems and tools downstream, plus a lot of human beings. And it's important to note that this is all happening at scale. Madhura, actually, our member numbers since have actually increased this year already. I think you were saying 23,500 members at the beginning. We're already this year up to 24,000 members. So that's organisations from 164 different countries contributing their metadata records into our infrastructure. 50% of those members are actually based in Asia, and the majority consider themselves to be universities or scholar-led first and foremost. All of those members have contributed over 177 million open metadata records to Crossref. And those APIs I mentioned receive 2 billion calls every month from thousands of systems, tools, ingesting and reusing that metadata. So in terms of how Crossref sees our role in preserving the integrity of the scholarly record, we're really focused on enriching those metadata records to provide complete and better trust signals. But also we want to keep barriers to membership and participation as low as possible to make sure that we've got an inclusive and complete scholarly record. So how does the research community make use of that metadata that our members provide? Well, I'm sharing a diagram here which shows the sort of organisations which make use of Crossref metadata. Library discovery systems, for example, metrics and analytics tools such as Web of Science or PubMed. You've got specialist databases, you've got governments, you've also got researchers, bibliometricians, research integrity sleuths, all making use of this metadata that's been provided to take a view on the quality of the content, the quality of the research process, the quality of the publishing process, the integrity that's built into that whole system. But actually, it's not just metadata about individual items that's the most useful to those in the community. It's actually the links and relationships and the context that all these elements find themselves in. So at Crossref, we use this term, the Research Nexus, to describe that. So for those who can't see the screen, I'm showing a diagram which has a circle in the middle showing the objects, people, and institutions involved here. So journal articles, books, conference papers, authors, reviewers, institutions. And around the outside are the different ways that those objects, people, and places interact with each other and the different relationships that they have. And it's these contexts that really provide the valuable information for research integrity. For example, knowing which objects reference other objects really helps to put that in context. Knowing who the authors were, what institutions they're affiliated with, that all helps to build this context to infer the integrity of the work being reviewed. So our member obligations are important here to help our members demonstrate their commitment to research integrity. So there are various obligations for Crossref members. So our members need to deposit accurate metadata and create DOI links in a very timely fashion, so this metadata record becomes available as quickly as possible. Only registering what you have legal rights to. So that means only registering the content where your organisation is the publisher and your organisation is taking on sort of a long-term commitment to steward that content and its metadata. And that's particularly important for institutions. If you're working at an institution, you should only register DOI records for content that is actually published by your institution. You shouldn't register a DOI record for an article in a journal that's published by another organisation, even if one of your staff authored that article. It's the responsibility of the publisher of the journal to register the DOI. Other obligations include making sure you have a unique and active landing page for each DOI, and also carefully display the DOI on the landing page so readers can see easily how to access that metadata record. You need to maintain and update your metadata record and your landing URLs over the long term, and also link your references. So on your actual published articles, when you display your reference lists, add in the DOIs if they exist for all of those references. So any readers interested to find more about the context of that research can click on the DOI link and quickly and easily find themselves at the research that maybe inspired the paper that they're reading. So how can you as a member demonstrate your support of ISR? Well, one of the easiest ways is to make sure that you are definitely following those member obligations. To only register DOI records for content that you publish and where you are the steward. Make sure you register rich, full DOI records for everything you publish in a timely manner. The richer the record, the more of that context you're providing to signal to the community the practices and behaviours that went into that effort. And also make sure you're clear about which organisation is responsible for this content. So if there are any problems, the community knows which organisation to go to make reports and seek help. So I talked earlier about metadata elements that can maybe help to signal trust. So adding references, being clear on who are the authors, adding funding. There are a few ways that you can quickly lose trust. So one way to lose trust is displaying unregistered DOIs. So that means a DOI string is displayed on your website, but it's not yet registered with Crossref. So it doesn't resolve, and also there isn't a metadata record associated with us. So always make sure you register all of your DOIs with Crossref. Another way to lose trust is to have DOIs that resolve to a 404 page. Now, this might happen if your content has moved on your website, or you maybe have a new website domain. All you need to do there is make sure you're updating the resolution URLs associated with your DOI, and that'll make sure your DOI continues to resolve to a live page, and then readers can feel trust that this organization is taking their commitments seriously. Another way to lose trust is to have inaccurate or incomplete metadata records. So metadata records with really limited information, so not much of that richer context that we talked about. So maybe it doesn't have references or funding information. Maybe there's limited information about the authors and their institutions. Maybe it doesn't use the other useful persistent identifiers that you can use to identify authors and institutions, such as ORCID IDs, raw identifiers. Or maybe there's inaccuracies or typos. So the best way to create these trust signals for the community is to make sure that you're registering working DOIs and you have really complete and accurate metadata records about your content. So make sure you're registering accurate metadata at the beginning, but also really commit to that long-term stewardship of your metadata. So if you get reports of metadata problems, make sure you're responding to them and updating your metadata. Make updates when things change. So if the location of your article moves online, make sure you're updating the resolution URL associated with that DOI record. Make sure you're fixing typos or inaccuracies. It may be something as simple as you've misspelled an author's name, but that's reducing trust in your publishing process. So always come back, fix any typos or inaccuracies. As hopefully everybody knows, there's a one-off charge to Crossref members when you first register your first DOI record for an article. But once that metadata record exists, you can come back and update that metadata record as often as you want, free of charge. So there's never any charge to update the metadata associated with an existing DOI record. And in fact, we'd encourage all of our members to do updates as often as possible, keep things up to date, add extra metadata as you get it, fix those typos and inaccuracies. And there are a few specific metadata elements which really do work as trust signals. And I've talked a little bit about some of these earlier in my talk. So references are key. So you can register your references as part of your metadata record. And that really helps to create that context for that article. You can really see the previous work that has inspired it and the context in which it exists. And making links to related data in the metadata, again, is a real sign of trustworthiness. So it proves that the authors are comfortable to share their data, and it really helps with reproducibility. Adding in the contributors and their roles, and particularly using ORCID identifiers where you have them. Obviously, it's sometimes difficult to differentiate between authors. Some people have the same names as other researchers, or their names may change, or their names may have a few different spellings. But using an ORCID identifier means you can always uniquely identify that individual. And adding affiliations for those authors into the metadata is also key. So what institutions are those authors based at? And again, there's a unique identifier for those organisations themselves, RORs, the Research Organisation Registry. And we'd encourage you to include those, again, to uniquely identify those organisations. And that's particularly key because it's a real signal for the institution that is ultimately responsible for this piece of research. And of course, finally, funding information is really useful context. So adding in information about which organisation funded the research. And again, you can use RAWs to identify funding organisations, and the grants themselves. And there are actually grant DOIs now. We have many funders joining Crossref to register grant DOIs, so unique identifiers for individual grants. And again, you can include those in your metadata record to really link up your piece of research with its wider context. Managing post-publication updates openly is also a good signal. So if an item's been withdrawn or retracted, don't just remove that page from your website. Leave the web page active, explaining what's happened, and you can update the metadata record too. Maybe put the word withdrawn or retracted at the start of the article. And you can also add retraction or withdrawal metadata. The third event in this Indian webinar series is actually really focused on managing post-publication updates. So I put the link at the bottom. I'm sure we can share it in the chat as well. Do sign up for that. So in summary, the best way to demonstrate your commitment to research integrity is to really commit to that long-term stewardship of your content and your metadata record. Ensure your DOI continues to resolve to a live landing page, have accurate, rich, up-to-date metadata records to really show that context. If you stop having responsibility for a title, get in contact with us and we can work to move the title record to a new owner who can then steward those records going forwards. And also make sure where you can, you're working with an archive and add archive information into your metadata. So if the worst happens and you're no longer able to host that content, there's always somewhere that the research community can find it. Right, thank you very much. That's it from me. I'm going to stop my sharing and pass over to Marie.
Thank you very much, Amanda and Madhura, for the introduction. Let's see about sharing my slides. All right, what can you see right now?
Yep, we can see your slide, Marie.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Amanda, for highlighting the importance of preserving the integrity of this scholarly record. And this is the main mission of the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE. We want to build this culture of integrity together with the communities. And one thing we are promoting in particular now is reducing the stigma around the post-publication changes so that they can be viewed primarily as preservation of the integrity of the scholarly record rather than various types of punitive steps for misconduct. And as Amanda said, there will be a focus on specifics on how to maintain post-publication corrections in the next webinar. So today I'll present a bit the COPE guidance documents on post-publication changes for retractions and expressions of concerns, and dive a bit further as well on the importance of upholding integrity of the metadata. So first, a few words on COPE for those of you who are not overly familiar with the committee. It is a nonprofit organization based in the UK with over 14,000 members, typically individual journals from almost 100 countries around the world. We opened membership a couple of years ago also to universities and institutions where there are research integrity offices who can benefit from really working and exchanging information with us. And as I said, the main aim of COPE is really to create this culture of publication integrity, bringing together the various participants and stakeholders relevant to publishing, including Crossref. A big part of how COPE does this is by sharing policies and core practices that are really required for publication integrity. So these will range from handling allegations of misconduct to authorship disputes, potential competing interests, and in general, overall journal management. For each of those, there are a series of free resources available on the website. And on the COPE guidance page that you can see here, you can see that there are different types of resources with all of their definitions. So you'll have the most important ones would be the COPE positions that are short statements that officially summarize our stance on various topics. Typically, we would have statements on geopolitical disputes, AI, authorship, or plagiarism. And then you have the guidelines that are the formal COPE policy documents for best publication ethics practices. We also endorse some guidance that are provided by other associations. For example, the NISO best practices for retractions is one endorsed guideline from COPE. So COPE has also worked to narrow down publication ethics to a number of core practices that you can see listed here. And while there is a strong focus on preempting issues with authors and journals, there are also some core policies related to data, reproducibility, as well as post-publication discussions and corrections. And we'll dive into this core practice now. There is a COPE focus page. So this is a hub page that has all the relevant resources on a particular topic, in this case, post-publication review. And so the aim is to really help publishers, journals, editors, authors ensure their accountability for maintaining the integrity of the published record, ensuring the version history remains available and linked to the original work, all things that Amanda was mentioning before. So when we do retractions, corrections, expression of concerns, they all have to be linked to the original data. There's guidance on how also to cooperate with institutions and how to communicate to the authors and so on. So I'll go now into more details into the two main guidelines related to this for expressions of concern and retractions. They were both revised and published with improvements in the last 6 months. So there's new relevant guidance there. First, for the expressions of concerns guidelines, these are notices that are issued by a publisher and linked to a particular publication that gives a warning that the publication may contain errors or be otherwise untrustworthy. Amanda was mentioning the trust markers. So in this case, this is saying that there is a lack of trust in a particular article that was published. The guidelines will help you through when these should or shouldn't be used, what to include in the text, and again, how to communicate with the authors when these cases happen. Some of the key points I just want to highlight on when to issue an expression of concern. These will typically be when there are significant and valid concerns about the research, but it's not clear to what extent the research is unreliable. And there either is an ongoing investigation or you're pending to hear back from the authors on information that is not immediately available. And it's clear that there will be a minimum of several months needed for a resolution on this particular case. So you don't want to wait months to issue a retraction. You can already warn readers that there is a concern about the research with an expression of concern. It can also be issued when there's a breach in journal policy that can be resolved, but it doesn't warrant retraction. For example, the underlying data was available when the review happened, but it's no longer available and you can't go back and validate the research. What should be included in an expression of concern is here, again, the importance of metadata. There needs to be the original article. It's clearly identified. There's a bidirectional link will be needed between the notice and the paper, and it needs to be freely available. It cannot be behind any kind of paywall. And in writing the notice, we really wanted to be clearly stated what the concern is, and it has to be written in an objective and factual way without accusatory language. So this guideline goes in combination, obviously, with the retractions guidelines. And when making editorial decisions, journals and editors should consult both when they're doing their investigation for post-publication concerns to decide if the retraction is delayed or if you're not sure it warrants a retraction, to then go for an expression of concern. The updated retraction guidelines, they are really providing a more detailed and expanded framework to deal with the, let's say, increasingly complex landscape of misconduct that we are seeing. The core purpose of a retraction remains unchanged. It has always been for COPE to correct the literature and alert readers that the content is invalid and cannot be relied upon. It is not aiming to correct the punish the author. It's really about correcting the literature and ensuring integrity. The guide helps you figure out, again, when to retract, what to include in a notice, and again, more practical steps on how to handle the cases internally, who would investigate, and how to communicate, again, with authors. The new guidelines really expand upon the reasons that warrant retraction. Originally, it was really about major errors in the research, plagiarism, or redundant publication, papers published twice. But now there are more types of misconduct that have been identified in the last years, and the retraction guidelines include cases for image irregularities, fictitious data or identity, undisclosed use of artificial intelligence, and manipulation of the peer review, for example, paper mills. So the concept of an editor losing confidence in the content of an article after having identified one or more of these concerns is really introduced as the basis of an editorial decision to retract. So there's a focus on losing confidence, losing trust in the content. As for expressions of concerns, the metadata is very important, and the notice should link to the retracted article, identify the title, the authors, and again, be freely accessible, not behind a paywall. One of the key points highlighted in the guidelines is, as I mentioned, this change of mentality within the community, that the aim of retraction is to correct the literature, to ensure the integrity of the published record, not to punish the authors. The guidelines are clear on the type of wording to use to be in that framework. And destigmatizing retractions is important because in the grand scheme of things, also with AI ingesting all sorts of information, it's way more important to have integrity of the data and to remove from the published record the invalid information than to work on determining the guilt or the specific misconduct. And certainly the publishers and journals and editors are now refocusing on this aspect of the integrity of the published record. As I mentioned at the beginning, ensuring adequate post-publication corrections and validity of data are core practices for COPE. And I will touch now quickly on COPE membership, as I know it's quite relevant for a lot of you, and how these are related to these particular principles. So COPE released in August 2025 an amazingly thorough guide on getting journals ready to apply for COPE membership. It has a full step-by-step guide for applications and on how to prepare your journals to ensure you do meet all the publication ethics criteria for membership. COPE introduced these new guidance, documents, and tools to be able to increase the transparency and reduce confusion that we've had in the past with applications. It really helps prospective members to understand what is required to join COPE, the clear eligibility and membership criteria, and also support potential members to prepare their journal with best practices. So there's a detailed guide to applying for journal membership that explains what information applicants need to provide. I think I have a slide on this. Yes, it's complemented by this guidance and tools by the ethics toolkit for a successful editorial office that's now available as a set of web pages as well as a PDF to make it easier to navigate for people who need to use it. The toolkit has been updated with references to the new COPE guidance, including the retractions, and it's really there to support the applicants and the existing members in maintaining ethics. It gives advice also on how to develop guidelines for authors, reviewers, editors, how to ensure publication ethics practices for the journals, and how to maintain the COPE core principles. So going back to the actual guide for membership, there are 3 new key features that I wanted to highlight that are here. So there's a very transparent description of the assessment process of how members are reviewed and conducted. There's a clear eligibility requirements and minimum criteria, including on metadata, with direct links to relevant guidance for further support if you need it. And there's an application form guide that outlines all the details that you'll need to submit for your journal. And I will finish by clearly highlighting some of the key points in the criteria for COPE membership. What I presented earlier regarding expressions of concerns and retractions is one of the minimum criteria that a journal must meet to be able to apply for COPE. There needs to be clear policy that demonstrate the options for post-publications, corrections, and discussions. And we will look at the journal to see if they have any corrections, any retractions. And to link back to the presentation on digital preservation, this is also one of the minimum criteria for COPE membership, to be able to demonstrate that there are arrangements for the long-term digital preservation of the papers with DOIs, to ensure that the articles have these identifiers, as well as to have persistent unique identifiers for articles, including corrections and retractions as well. So with all the information you received from Amanda and I today, I hope that you feel thoroughly convinced of the importance of maintaining the integrity of the published record with digital preservation, metadata, and post-publication corrections, and that you feel equipped to be able to do that with the resources we present. That's it for me, and I think we will go to questions now.
Thanks so much, Amanda and Marie. Thank you, Amanda. I noticed that you have been answering questions in the Q&A box. There are a couple of questions in the chat as well that I've picked up. While I ask them to our speakers, if anybody wants to add any other questions, please keep adding them in the Q&A box while I pick up some more questions from the chat. We have a question in the chat. If the DOI is not existing for any publication, can this be checked by simple text query? Amanda, did you want to say anything about that?
Yes, that's true. So if you have, I'm assuming the question here is where you have a list of references for your article, and you're looking to find if there are DOIs that you can do reference linking. So yeah, our STQ tool will help you check if there is already an existing Crossref DOI for your references. But even if there isn't one, I'd still include that item in your metadata. Somebody was asking a similar question in the Q&A box. And the reason I say to still include it is this is not a one-off thing, registering your DOIs. We said before, we hope members will update their metadata, but also behind the scenes, the Crossref system is constantly sort of double checking things in our metadata corpus. So we have a job that runs to check to see whether, for example, a DOI has been newly registered for something. So you might, at the point of registering your references with us, you might have a few references in there that don't yet have a DOI, but give us that information anyway, and then our system will be able to make links with the DOI if one gets registered later.
Thanks, Amanda. There's one more question just below that, I think, for you, Amanda. Do the Google Scholar crawlers, are they able to crawl through the article metadata that's available on Crossref?
Yes, so we know Google Scholar does use our metadata. What we don't know is how often they use it. So we often get questions from members saying, you know, there was a mistake in my metadata. I fixed the error, but it's still incorrect on Google Scholar. And unfortunately, we don't have a formal relationship with Google Scholar here. We don't know how often they'll send their bots back to pick up the metadata. So if you've got a specific query there about a specific thing, it's definitely worth reaching out to Google about that. So we know they use it, but we don't know how regularly, unfortunately.
Right, thank you. We have questions for you, Marie. So in the Q&A box, the first question is, what tools does COPE recommend to find AI use in manuscripts?
The question. Well, I can say that COPE is currently working on a new guideline on the use of AI in peer review that will cover this. There is no individual tool that is being recommended, also because the accuracy of most of the tools right now is not fabulous. In general, what COPE recommends is you have to look at the guidelines that are for the individual journals if you're an author to see if the journals accept that you use AI to write papers, and then the other way around as an editor, if your publisher is providing some tools for you to look at the content. What is very important in any case, and the one thing that COPE will say, is do not upload a confidential manuscript to external AI tools. Please do not do this. As a reviewer, as an editor, these tools will integrate this content that is not yet published, and it will then learn from this. So this is the one thing I would recommend to avoid. Actually, we would rather recommend that you do not use a tool to detect if a paper is with AI. If you have your own suspicion, you can neutrally contact the authors and ask them, did you use AI and did you fail to disclose it? Please disclose the use of AI. The importance is transparency and knowing when AI was used rather than accusing the authors, and again, rather than uploading it to external tools that will then integrate the confidential data.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering that. There are a couple of questions related to COPE membership. One is about, is there a cost to become a COPE member?
There is a yearly cost once you become a member. It varies depending on countries, on the size of the members. So this will depending on the particular organization. It's not a very high cost. And I know there's a note about this being a slow process. That is correct. It has been quite slow in the last year and a half because COPE was moving to a new platform to assess membership and releasing the new guidelines. So it has been actually paused, I think, for the last 9 months, but we are reopening now the application processes, and there's more people evaluating the membership application. So we hope to make it faster from 2026.
Oh, that's great to know. Another question related to membership, somebody's asking in the chat, could you speak a little bit about what are the advantages of applying for COPE membership as a journal?
Yeah, there's two things. So one, we have a lot of free online resources, but being a member gives you additional resources, typically having COPE members who can give specific webinars, or you have access to additional sources. So that's one of the advantages. The other one is just the overall stamp of approval. So given how the COPE membership is fairly strict on ethical practices, when you become a member, you can put the COPE logo on your website, and it gives this trust additional stamp of approval that Amanda was talking about. So also being a COPE member gives you that advantage from an external perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Marie. I'm just looking through the Q&A box to see what's remaining. There's a question about hallucinated references. What can a publisher do when 10 or more references in a manuscript turn out to be LLM generated? It's a very tedious process to weed out such fake references. Any comments on this?
Agreed. I unfortunately have no suggestions for hallucinated references. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything from COPE, probably. Again, it's
No.
an editorial challenge, and we're all hoping there will be a tool soon to support us with that.
Yeah, from my experience at Frontiers, I can say we are developing our own internal tool to look at this, and there are other external tools. I think Cactus is pretty good at this. There's a few tools out there that are trying to match for sure the title, the authors, the DOIs. It is increasingly difficult with more authors with similar names, especially in China, where you have the same string of 5 authors the same year, but then the title is very different, can be cancer research versus energy. So it has become even more complex. So it's very easy to hallucinate something that could be very plausible. So yeah, this is very tricky even for the detection tools. So this is, I think, a problem that everybody is facing, big, small, major publishers, everybody, unfortunately.
Lots of great questions and comments. Great discussion happening here. Some more questions. Let me see if I can read this out. In line with COPE principles, which prioritize the correction and transparency of the scholarly record rather than the stigmatization of individuals, is there currently, or any plan in future developments, is there a mechanism that allows integrity-related events to be linked and contextualized when they occur within the same scholarly or editorial context? For example, at the level of a publication, its successive versions, or a journal, so as to provide a coherent and interpretable view of the scientific record without attaching these events directly to authors. So that's a very interesting thought.
Yeah, I think that's something that also Amanda can talk about. I think it will be covered a bit in the next webinar about how Crossref, once you actually register your corrections and retraction with Crossref, with Crossmark integrated in your paper, you can see the whole line of all the events if there's multiple events that have happened. So you have an article, then there was that date an expression of concern, and then on that date there was a retraction, and everything is kind of put together. So I think actually Crossref is where COPE would refer to that. I think in general, this would be then a proper integration of these crossmarks in various journals that would allow to maintain that better. One thing that is useful separately from that for the context, if you're talking about just looking at the context of different publishers, so there are dashboards now being created with Retraction Watch, so it's more dedicated to retractions, where you can actually see in the context of a particular journal or a particular field what types of retractions and things like that. So they are more related to fields or journals rather than the authors. You can also search by author, but they are really putting all the data together so that there can be this details. What COPE does is really trying to ensure that the retraction notices are very factual and put in context what the situation is. So as you said, if it's, and we're trying to also ensure that individual authors might take responsibility if they individually made a mistake, then it is one author who made a practical mistake. This is clearly stated. And then, for example, as a publisher with Frontiers, if we read that type of retraction notice, then we don't apply any stigma to any of the authors because it's a valid mistake that was made. It's accounted for. It's retracted, and we move on. So there's all of these different aspects that are coming into play right now.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. From the metadata point of view, obviously, if you've got an individual article that's been retracted, that needs to go into the metadata. But then that metadata becomes available in that wider context. So anybody making use of Crossref's metadata could choose, for example, to cut that information and look at retractions at journal level rather than individual article level, for example. So the key thing is just making the information, the metadata, as full and open as possible, and then the community can then take that data and sort of cut it whichever way feels appropriate.
Thanks, Amanda. I think there was one question in the chat that related to plagiarism. There's a question on that. If plagiarism is found post-publication, can any action be taken to authors by COPE?
Sorry, say that again.
There's a question that's asking if plagiarism is found post-publication, can any action be taken to authors by COPE? The person who's asking says that they've reported this matter as an editor-in-chief of journal to COPE, but did not get a response from COPE. So any comments on that?
Yeah, that's very rare. We are very responsive. We have 2 committees that do just that. So I'll take your name, we'll get your name, and I will make sure that COPE responds to you, because normally, yes, if there's a case of plagiarism, so either you can get from us a response on which guidelines to help you to do this. And if it's a dispute because you think there's plagiarism, but the authors are upset and they don't agree, then we have a facilitation committee where we engage with both parties to try to mediate the situation. So we offer both. It has to be that you are a COPE member to get this. So that's also an advantage of the COPE membership that I didn't mention earlier, to be involved with the mediation with the facilitation committee. We require COPE membership. So if you're not a COPE member, we would then just refer you to all the guidance that we have that can be helpful for the situation.
Thanks, Marie. Amanda, there's a question about Crossmark. Can you indicate an update to an article via Crossmark for a small correction that might not warrant a correction?
You can do. There's 12 types of updates that you can put in Crossmark in our schema. And it sort of varies from things like just a clarification or a correction or an expression of concern, all the way up to like a full retraction. So there's sort of a scale that you can add in there. I'll put into the chat what the various elements are. Let me do that. Update covered by Crossmark. There you go. So if you look in the chat, that's the list of types of update that you can cover through the Crossmark schema, and you can see it's kind of it's quite a scale in there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that in the chat.
No problem. I just Madhu, I just quickly wanted to talk about one of the questions that I answered by typing while we were talking, but I just wanted to talk about it a bit verbally, just with a nod to our friends at ROR, the Research Organisation Registry. So one of the questions in the Q&A box was about how to get your organisation or institution to have an identifier with ROR, and also the person asking the question was saying it's maybe a bit harder for more obscure institutions. So in the Q&A box, and I'll stick it in the chat, I've popped the link to how you can suggest an addition to ROR. So if your institution isn't in ROR, you can fill in a form online to put it forward. And there's also fairly broad inclusion criteria. So as long as you are sort of a research performing organisation, you should be eligible. One challenge I think the ROR team have at the moment is, like COPE, they have a lot of people wanting to be involved. So I think there is a bit of a backlog there. But if you fill in the form, and as long as you meet the criteria, you should be fine. So I'll stick those links in the chat box for everybody else as well now.
Thanks, Amanda. That would be useful for everybody to be able to see. Somebody asked whether the webinar video will be made available. Yes, we'll be circulating the recording and the slides with everybody after this webinar, so look out for that. I see one more question about COPE in the Q&A box. Does COPE act on per-peer remarks or findings?
That's a good question. The answer is no. Per-peer remarks and findings are really for journals, and they have journal dashboards as well for journals to monitor. So I can give the example of Frontiers, where we actually monthly go and find all the flags that are flagged for per-peer for all our journals. And then we have an investigation team internally that will look at all the comments to see if some of the papers need to be corrected, retracted. This is not for COPE. Obviously, if COPE is brought a particular case, as we mentioned earlier, for moderation or for investigation, that is a very specific case, we will look at everything, including per-peer comments. We also will look at that for membership. So if a journal applies and we start to look and find that there's a lot of comments on per-peer about the articles in that particular journal and that they have not been acted upon, this is a mark of trust that we would want the journals to act on per-peer comments.
Thank you for that context, Marie. Don't see any other open questions, but I wanted to give both of you a chance whether you wanted to share any final comments or any thoughts or elaborate on anything that you have heard so far from our audience.
So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's attended, because I think a really good signal of caring about research integrity is having an interest and attending these sort of events, learning more, and then taking that back to your institutions. So having the motivation to want to support the integrity of the scholarly record is really important. So thank you very much all for attending and contributing and asking such great questions.
Yeah, thank you for Crossref, to Crossref for organizing this event. Very happy to be a part of this with COPE. As I said, COPE wants to build this community and this thought of integrity, and this is what these kinds of webinars are about. Integrity is not a black and white question. It's always shades of gray, and it's something that we really just need to discuss together and find solutions or the best practices, right? It's not about things that are black and white. It's best practices that we aim for and that we work towards.
Thank you so much, both of you. We are almost at time as well. I want to thank both of you, Marie and Amanda, for your time and efforts today and for sharing all of this useful information with our attendees. This is a very important topic for the scholarly community, as you've already mentioned. Thanks to everybody who attended this webinar today for your time and attention. I hope that you found this webinar useful. We'll be making the slides and the recording available, as I said, so do look out for that. And with this, I would like to bring this webinar to a close. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
Bye.